Hi, my name is Elizabeth Thornton, and I'm here to teach you a little bit about spherometry or coding in the classroom, particularly with the use of spheros. So I'm a high school math teacher, so I called it spherometry in a reference to geometry and trigonometry portion. This little puppy is Opie, and if you click on him on each slide, you will be able to go to my resource slide at the very end. So I wanted to start off with some clips of some of my kids in our end of the year project. So let's.
Okay.
So this clip is kind of what they were working on and working towards. And then this next clip is going to show you kind of our end result product.
Ours says something. Yep. Ours isn't making it.
They had an error. Okay, we'll get to it in just a second. One, let's go.
All right, so this is kind of our end result presentation. We ran this twice, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about it later, but I just kind of wanted to show you what the spheros could look like and what you could do with them in the end. Obviously, this is not all you could do, but this is an example of what we did with our spheros. So what we're going to do in this session is we're going to go over a little bit about spheros, how we use them in the classroom, and then if you come to my session in person, we will do spheros and have some time to work with spheros, and then we'll do takeaways. So what are spheros? Spheros started as spherical little robots that can be paired with a tablet or a smartphone or even a Chromebook or a laptop. And there are now a bunch of robots that you can choose from, and they can change colors, they can play different missions, they control the sphero's movement, and they can be paired with any device that has a Bluetooth and can access the app or the online program. So that's kind of a little bit about spheros. What makes spheros great is the Sphero-EDU app. So in the app or on Sphero-EDU, you'll be able to create a class, and this allows you to assign certain coding projects or projects that you come up with to your class, and every person in your class will have their name displayed, and you can monitor the coding projects that they're working on in real time and follow them on your iPad or your laptop or whatever device you have to monitor them. But what makes that really fantastic is since you're able to monitor their progress in real time, you can scale up or scale down what type of coding that they should be working on, have the difficulty level, and you can modify it to differentiate with every student in the class at the same time. It's really fantastic, and it's really the best way to use Spheros is to create that class so you can easily change, okay, I have this kid and they are doing fantastic. So let me see what we can add to this challenge or what they can think of to add to the challenge to make it more difficult for them and for them to get something out of it. Whereas you might have a kid who, maybe, for example, in my classroom, I had quite a few that did not speak any English. So instead of doing text blocks, we did more of a drawing block, which allowed them to do the exact same exercise and get the same type of math out of it. However, they didn't have to deal with that extra language barrier that made it a little more difficult for them. And it's really easy to see, watch them build their code out so that you can easily, when you get to them, you'll be like, okay, you're doing fantastic or whatever. And so you can easily change what they need to be doing in that time period. And then the other thing that's really great about Sphero-EDU is they already have a ton of coding activities and programs made for all subjects, age groups, ability level. You can find anything from high school art to first grade science and everything in between. and I've got it linked here for Sphero-EDU. What I personally like to do is I personally like to use that as like my shopping cart. I like to see what I can find and then compile some of that and create new programs on your own. And what I mean by that is like sometimes they'll have something that's really great, but I know, oh, my kids aren't exactly at the text level yet. Maybe they need to just stay in the drawing or the block phase. And so I'll create that exact same program and I'll just reword the instructions for them to say at blocks or code in drawing or something like that. Another thing that is really fantastic about the Sphero-EDU programs is you can go in and you can already see that they have an example code for you to work with. So if you have no idea how to code at all, which is totally okay, you can go in and you can see, oh, okay, here's an example code. So if my kids are really struggling, I could go in and find the example code and look at their code and be like, here's where you're falling off. Or if I have a kid that's really excelling, what I like to do is I like to take a picture of their code because it's never the same. The code is almost never the same. And so I take a picture of it and I add it to my repertoire of example codes. And that just allows me to build up on that and find new ways for the students to show different ideas. And I really personally like to create the new programs for my class based on a combination of the ideas because I do teach math and I specifically have taught Math 1, 2, and those are the classes that I've taught the most of. So it's just easier sometimes to create because North Carolina is a little bit different in the way they structure their math. A program that's specifically for Math 1 or specifically for Math 2 that I can pull in and focus on the elements that I specifically want to versus distracting us from elements that aren't necessarily in the Math 2 curriculum per se. So let's go ahead and get into the second part. I did want to take a minute to touch on the digital learning standards that the SPHER-O-METRY touches on. They really touch on all of them. And there's so much you can do with them that would allow you to touch on them even more deeply. But what I have found has been the most exciting for my students is the empowered learner, the innovative designer, and the computational thinker were the standards that I just saw the most growth on in those standards during our sessions. I saw growth in all the standards, don't get me wrong, but those standards, it was allowed the students to use the technology to take an active role in their learning, and it helped both with the classroom matter, the Spheros technology, and just created someone who was very excited and wanted to learn and thinking outside the box, and just allowed them to go home and be excited to tell their parents about, oh, I'm learning about this in math. And they could actually express what they were learning and how it was applicable to the real world. And this really allowed the students to extend their knowledge and share that knowledge with people who might not love math, because I know it's not everyone's favorite subject, but it got them excited about the subject and allowed them to talk about the subject with ease, even if they were not great at math. It allowed them to connect with the math material. And that was really what I loved about the Spheros. It also allowed students who were not super strong computational thinkers to see it in a visual aspect and allow them to approach the math challenges and model the classroom standards. Particularly what we worked on a lot was trigonometry, and it allowed them to see triangles per se and draw them out with the Spheros. And it just allowed them to use what they saw in the real world with, let's say, for example, I had one student talk about how, oh, this is just like a ladder, and like determining the angle I need for a ladder, and just connect it in a way to understand the math behind the Sphero codes. It also allowed students to be innovative. And I cannot express this enough how creative they were. There are so many ways to code with Spheros, and no two codes ever were the same, ever. I found that even if they were all coding a square, and our very first challenge was just to code a square, they all coded something a little bit different. So it allowed everyone to it allowed them and me to see, oh, okay, this is what they can do. This is how they're thinking. And it allowed us to approach our classroom structure just a little bit differently. because I was able to see, oh, well, this group of kids, they're very hands-on versus this group of kids, they're very much so more analytical thinking. And so I just approached my instructions a little bit different based off of what I saw with that SPHER-O program. And I never saw anybody code anything the same. I'm sure there will be some, but even when you went up to the students who were struggling, they already had some code and you were just kind of helping them think about the next step. They never had the same code start, and whenever you help them think to the next step of the code, for example, maybe they just couldn't figure out how to turn a right angle, nobody ever really turned at the same angle, even though, like, if you or I were doing it, you would probably say, oh, we'll go 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180, 270, right? They found different ways to come up with that. They found it was just really exciting for me to see how their brains work, and exciting for them to see, oh, well, there's so many ways to solve this. It's not a one and done solution. And I really think that helped with them recognizing that, oh, I can fail a little bit of math and it's going to be okay because it doesn't have to be just this way. There are multiple ways to solve these problems. And I just wanted to take a minute to touch on that. So let's talk about kind of how I incorporated my Spheros in my classroom. We kind of started on our first full week of classes. We had an introduction in the library where we got to play with the Spheros and just do a free play. And when I did that free play, what happened was I just went in and I laid down squares for all of my groups. I created groups of 2 because I did have high schoolers. And so it just allowed for the sharing a little bit easier, I've found. But I know that when they're younger, sometimes groups of 3 and 4 work a little bit better just because the idea of sharing will be better. But because my kids were so big and so tall, we did groups of 2, and that just allowed us to share easier. But with that introduction, we just kind of took it and we went in and they just coded a square. That was really their goal for the day, was to code a square and come up with something creative to add to it. It could be a color, it could be a phrase, it could be a exclamation at the end of it. It was really very much so just allowed them to, okay, this is what a Sphero can do. Here are all the fun things I can add to it. Oh, here's the different ways I can code it. Let me make it harder. Let me make it easier. So just a very basic introduction and free play. And that was really one day that we did that, which just ended up being about a 90-minute session. It also allowed them to figure out all the kinks of, okay, because sometimes the Spheros do disconnect because they are connected with Bluetooth. And so it allowed them to just see, oh, this is going to disconnect. Here's how I'll log back in and things like that. The second thing I did was and this is just kind of my thing, you don't have to follow this, but this is kind of how I incorporated it in my classroom, is we did weekly challenges. And they weren't always weekly. It was every time we had a full week and we're almost done with the unit, we did the challenge. So it tended to be more like a bi-weekly challenge. And what that is, and it seems really hard, but what that is they really worked on building their coding skills, and it was just in 90-minute sessions inside the classroom. They were once again in groups of 2, and they really worked on little challenges that related to our lesson. So we kind of started out with our square and their introduction, and so then we built on a 45-45-90 triangle, 30-60-90 triangles. We did some probability and random choice. We solved quadratics, and it really allowed them to see not only drawing codes, we got to work on blocks, and then we moved up to text coding. And we did start out in groups of 3 at the very beginning with our introduction of the year, but by the second semester, I had moved everybody to groups of 2. I just found it so much easier for them to work and share their devices, because you are sharing a device. And these weekly challenges, we did it in the classroom. So they had their Chromebooks, but I found they like the best to use their little smartphones because everyone's got one. And I had never had an issue with the smartphone, but what they do is they pull it out. They have the Sphero EDU app. They log into our code, classroom with their little code, and then they code. and whatever the challenge is. Sometimes the challenges would be different from station to station, but we always ended up a weekly challenge with a little competition, just because I think that was fun and they really enjoyed that. And it was just a great way for the students to work through the Spheros throughout the year, and for them to see, oh, okay, well, maybe I wouldn't use this type of math every day, but maybe I could use it if I worked with an engineer, or if I was an architect or something like that. And then at the end of the year, what we did, and with the videos that you saw at the very beginning, is we did a week long, well, it was a week and a half long challenge in the media center with trigonometry. And it was really a great way to wrap up our semester before test prep started. And for them to just, because math 2, I did this with my math 2 classes, and this was just their first time introducing trigonometry. So it was really a great way for us to wrap up our instruction, and for them to see, oh, okay, I understand what she's saying now. I kind of get it, for my visual learners and for my hands-on learners. And that end of the year challenge really, let me go show you some pictures. What we did was we had an egg drop, and they had to calculate their fall of the egg drop. And then they came in after their egg drop. We used our SPHER-O-RVRs, which was a new thing our school got last year. And they're a little bit bigger. And we used our SPHER-O-RVRs to create an angle of elevation, angle of depression for these spheros to go over. And they had to follow an obstacle course. And so these are just some of the pictures. So I set it up where they had to get their egg in their RVR from their starting point to the hospital in the middle of the room, and they had to build their bridge. So we spent a day building the bridge, then we worked on the obstacle course, and then they kind of put it all together, and we had kind of a competition. And so here's kind of the setup for them building their bridge and the start of the coding. And everybody's bridge was a little bit different, but that was just kind of the fun and the neat thing to see. Obviously, not everybody was able to succeed on their first try with the bridge building. But what was great about that is they were able to, at the end of, we did like 45-minute sessions. At the end of every 45 minutes, we kind of talked about, we debriefed in person, and we talked about, oh, what's one thing that's working for you? What's one thing that's not working for you? And then we just, if something was really not working, we kind of, as a group, as a whole entire class, brainstormed together, okay, here's how maybe we could fix that. Because what was happening is they self-selected their groups, they picked out their team names and all that. And so what was happening is there were a few students who just seemed to really struggle with building their bridge and understanding, oh, I need some structural support behind that, and less so the angles and more the structural support. So it was really fascinating to see who was able to come up with that. And that was just kind of how I did it in my classroom. I will say, there are so many ways you could do it in your classroom, but I do highly recommend, if you do nothing else, don't go in with the expectation that you're going to immediately know how to use the Spheros at the very beginning. Go in with an example free play, because that free play is really what allowed them to figure out how to use the Spheros and feel comfortable enough to work on the challenges, because every single student failed at some point while working on a Sphero. Not because they wanted to, just because that's the nature of it. And the way the coding works is it doesn't always work out just how you want it to work out, because maybe you place the Sphero off just a little bit. Maybe you, instead of rotating 90 degrees, you rotate to 70 degrees and you went the opposite way. So I really suggest doing a free play introduction, just starting with a simple square. If your students already know how to use the Spheros, you can go ahead and go into weekly challenges, but I really highly suggest the free play. And then I have included some Sphero activities. Obviously, if you click on these links, you'll be able to go to the activities based off of this. I have the math and science lesson plans already incorporated out, and I will show that to you in just a second. But this, if you just click on these links, you'll be able to go see an example of the activity, an example of the code that could possibly go with it, and ways to possibly incorporate that activity. But then
Coach
here's
me
kind
through
of
it.
what our free
Talk to me
play
about
looked
what's
at the
happening.
beginning of the
130
year.
degrees
And I'll play
at
this
24
video for
speed,
you for their very
for 5
first,
seconds, and then it's delayed.
how he talked us through this.
228 degrees
Maybe
at
if it'll
25
load.
speed for 4 seconds and gets delayed again.
Coach me through it. Talk to me about what's happening.
130 degrees
Oh no.
at 24 speed for 5 seconds.
Basically what's
and
happening.
It's delayed. To go 228 degrees.
Basically what's happening in this video is he's just talking us through how he coded his Sphero, and this is just our example to the free play. It's just a little square, and that was their challenge at the end of it, was to
for 5 seconds, and then it's delayed.
do that, to code the square. They had the free play where they had to work through it, and they got to code their little challenge.
Coach me through it. Talk to me about what's happening.
130 degrees at 24 speed for 5 seconds, and then it's delayed.
Let's go to the next one. And so this is the egg drop I was talking about, and what we did here is with our week-long challenge, we started with an egg drop, and I'll show you this video because this is a video. These are just them building the bridges and starting to work on that. It was really interesting to see the different ideas for the bridges. It was a little bit different, and they had to figure out how it was going to hold the RDR, but the RDR is not like when it did the battery unit. And kind of the layout of them, once they built the bridges, and how they were going to have their options work. You can see in that first one.
Start from further back.
Let's see. Final video coming through, one with the ambulance coming. And see that ambulance made it all the way through.
Go where?
And see, this is just kind of how they're going through it, and how they're thinking through it, and how every single time it was the same thing for different. These two videos were the same. They just had to figure out how to get through the obstacle course that they created, and this was their final result that they came up with that actually worked. So it obviously took some time for them to figure out what was going to happen and how to get it to work the way that they wanted to while meeting the requirements of our obstacle course.
That worked better.
Okay, so here's an example. And this is how they're containing their egg while they're doing it in their final example.
One, let's go.
And that's their hospital. And so this is our final example of.
Ours says something. Ours isn't making it.
They had an error. Okay, we'll get to it in just a second.
And if you can see, there were some errors in this. So what will say, there will be some errors with the Spheros. So instead of doing, if you're doing a competition like that one at the very end was, what I like to do with those competitions is I like to run them typically twice, just because sometimes, like I don't know if you saw, there was a piece of cardboard in the way that was just by accident blocked the other person's code. Sometimes the Spheros will die unexpectedly in the middle of the course if you're using the bolts in particular, and sometimes they'll just be just a little bit of a where they didn't put it right where they started their code originally, so, or they didn't orient their code. So just in case there's it's a snafu in it, a lot of times it runs perfectly on the first try.
Start from further back.
Just to show you that yes, there are some errors still, so please be wary of that, and please, if you're doing a competition, let them run it twice, because they will, it just is appreciate that because they worked really hard on making it work and
Go where?
kind of frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to show you is at the very end of all of our week-long challenge is we started to talk about the math behind it. They obviously had to do the math while they were doing it. And what I mean with that is, so now that they've been able to play with the spheres, now that you did your introduction or all of that stuff, I incorporated it and I redesigned it, okay? Because that is what made the Spheros so impactful in my classroom. Is a lot of the pre-made materials on the SPHER-O-EDU website already have the subject incorporation with them. An easy incorporation for an English would be just a reflection, and that could work for social studies and art. You could do it where they have to tell you a story for English or art. If you wanted to go in more in depth, you could make the students complete the math for the code of the objects. Another thought my class really enjoyed was completing the engineering design process with that redesign. So there were a couple of weeks where we did the challenges back to back and we just did the exact same challenge. They just had to redesign their code to make it so that it ran better, it ran smoother, and something like that. And they just reflected on it to find the weaknesses and figure out how they could do something better with it. And so what that looked like with the incorporation is this first page is their egg drop calculations, and then they've got the trigonometry calculations for their bridges. So with our bridges, I had them create, for every time they tested a bridge, they had to do a trigonometry calculation with it. They had to calculate their angle of depression and their angle of elevation. And what they noticed is when we came back to our group reflection, they realized, okay, our angles of elevation were all way too big for that first time, and our angles of depression were all way too steep, and things like that. And so they kind of found that in the end, they all had something around a 50 to 60 degree angle in that range of elevation and depression that worked with the Sphero and with the building materials that they had. And so once they did that calculation, at the end of it, they also calculated the angle of elevation of other people's bridges. So they went around and we just walked around. Each hospital was a group. So they walked around their hospital grouping, and with that, they calculated their angle of elevation and depression, and then they had to figure out, well, would it have worked with our code? And so what they did to figure that out was they ran their code and they tested their theory. A lot of them found that it wouldn't work, and that what they did was so specific to their bridge and their code. And it was just really fun to see what would work and what wouldn't work. But what I will say is that the incorporation is the most important part of using the Spheros. It's super great that you use the Spheros and that you're getting that hands-on experience. But if you're not connecting it back to that subject matter, you're really missing out on the super fun and important part of this, because what this incorporation allowed them to do with this week-long project was to allow them to use math without really realizing they were doing the math, because nobody was, oh, we have to do math, we have to calculate this, that's no fun. Nobody complained about it the entire time. Everybody was so excited to get in there, use the math, figure it out, and be like, okay. Because what happened for a lot of them with the bridges is they started out too steep, they went too low, and then they finally found the perfect in between to calculate it. It was just so fantastic to see them use the math to find their solution and then connect it back to their coding. And that's really the joy of that. And I will say, if you go on the SPHER-O-EDU website, which is on this activity catalog right here, if you click on that, a lot of those codes already have the connection to your activity, or a way to connect that to the activity if it's not exactly already connected. The other thing is I do have an educator's resource guide linked here as well, which is a great resource for if you know nothing about coding, how to get started, how to do all of that. And then I also have a getting started guide. This getting started guide includes, it's just the Sphero website, and it includes how to purchase a Sphero, how much they cost, and just some people to contact on our website for that. And at the bottom, I have our math and science incorporation, English history, and art, SCTE and SEL incorporation. They are grouped by grade level a little bit so that you can kind of scale up and scale down for that. And when I say that, what I mean is for that math and science, I have the activity, I have an example picture of the activity, and then I have, like for the math, I have the incorporation that we used for the upper levels, and then some of the incorporation that has been used by some other math teachers for the lower levels. And then for the arts and science, I kind of have more of the Sphero activity catalog examples on there. But for the math and science in particular, I really suggest if you're a math and science person, checking that out because it includes some of my resources that I've used and have created, and my students have really enjoyed that. So once again, thank you. My name is Elizabeth Thornton. If you would like to contact me, my email is down here, the letter EG Thornton 4@gmail.com, and just reach out. I am moving, so just please contact me at this email address and don't look for any North Dukeland. So thank you.